Hi, guys.
Hi, Anna.
Uh, my love from Budapest. Are you in New York?
Yes, I'm in New York.
So you're in New York. Okay, great. So, dear friends, I would like to introduce Carine Kanimba to you. Uh, Carine Kanimba studied together with my daughter, Veronica, a few years ago. You were doing your studies in master's program. It was European Masters in Law and Economics, and it was in Bologna. Uh, Secondly, a few months ago, I watched the most powerful video talk. It was a TED talk on the power of forgiveness, and it was Carine who delivered this TED talk. So Carine was standing in front of thousands of people, sharing her story. And what is Carine's story? Guys, many of you might have watched the movie Hotel Rwanda. So in Hotel Rwanda, there is a brave man called Paul. Paul who saves the lives of thousands of people during the terrible genocide 25 years ago. And Paul happened to be the uncle of Carine. If you have watched this movie, you might remember that at the very end of the movie, Paul and his wife Tatiana find two small babies, and Carine was one of the babies Paul and Tatiana find. Carine lost her parents, both her parents, when she was just 1 year old. And it happened during the time of genocide. So it happened during the terrible time. Afterwards, Carine was taken by her uncle and by her aunt to Belgium. Carine, am I right? Is there anything you would like to add to the story? Or is there anything you would like to add about yourself?
Yeah, yes. Well, you summarized it very well. So that's correct. The movie Hotel Rwanda is based on my uncle and adopted father, Paul Rusesabagina, who during the Rwandan genocide saved more than 1,200 people by sheltering them in his hotel while he was the manager of the hotel at the time. I was a baby at the time too, and I was thankfully saved by him and my aunt, who later on adopted my sister and I, and moved to Belgium shortly after the war. And yes, the movie is a great movie because not only does it show his role and his own bravery and his ability to pick up to save, to stand up for the people, for the things that he believes in, to stand up for people who he loved, and to see beyond the hatred that was being spread across Rwanda at the time. But also, it's an important movie because it shows the history of Rwanda, and it shows the consequences of inaction and the consequences of not speaking up when we're noticing injustice and when we're noticing tension rising, and not speaking up early enough can lead to very, very dangerous consequences. And Rwanda and the situation in 1994 in Rwanda demonstrated what it can look like. And so the movie helped in providing an image, a depiction of what it may look like, and hope that it also becomes a lesson so that it would never happen again.
A few days ago, I was watching this movie. I was watching it again. To tell you the truth, I had very hard feelings, and I'm a psychologist, I'm a coach, I know how to deal with my own emotions. Uh, I got very frequently very angry with the whole situation, with people that, like, people, what they were doing with they were doing with people who actually were the citizens of the same country, and some of them maybe were friends, maybe with some of them they got together, they invited each other to their homes.
Their neighbors.
The neighbors. So how was it possible? How was it possible? Uh,
Absolutely.
So
And the scary part too is that, exactly like you just said, some people had been living next to each other for 30 years, 20 years, even like sometimes more. And just one day, based on like it's sort of what happened in Rwanda prior to the Rwandan genocide, was a lot of propaganda, a lot of media propaganda, and people just raising hate towards one another. And so that slowly crept into the people's consciousness, and they became to internalize. And in 1994, it led to people taking that hate within their own hands and trying to act upon all those rhetoric that they had been hearing about throughout the years prior. And so yes, it's very scary to realize that some people who had been sometimes wives and husbands or neighbors or cousins or people who knew each other, were very close to each other, and the next day they were killing each other or completely denying each other's presence or existence out of hate.
yes, and I remember when, for example, in Europe there was this war in Yugoslavia, and we could talk now about many other countries, unfortunately, where it has happened. And in your TED talk, you were talking about the power of forgiveness, and I was really shocked when I heard that you were talking that, for example, you were about 7 years old when you just learned that, for example, people whom you thought were your mother and father were not your mother and father, that they adopted you. How did it feel for you at first?
Yeah, so it was like I was about 7 years old, and the part was so what had happened is that before that, my adoptive mother, had been wanting to tell my sister and I the truth for a long time. So the person who adopted me, my current mother, my adoptive mother, is my real aunt and was the sister to my biological brother. My biological father. And so for her, at the end of the war, she had not only had she her country just my adoptive mother not only had her country just been destroyed, but on top of that, she now had two additional baby girls, and two girls that were the daughters of her brother who had disappeared. And so she had the responsibility to raise us too, and she did it so gracefully. But it had been very hard for her, and we didn't know because we were too young to even realize what was going on as we were growing up. But it took a lot of courage for her to not only come to figure out how to tell us the truth about what had happened in the earlier part of our lives, but also for her to learn how to tell it to us as the daughters of her brother and her own daughters too, right? And so at the time when I was 7 years old, and I had described it in my TED talk, and my mother had a photo album, and we didn't have many photos of our parents, because of our biological parents, because everything was destroyed during the war. Most houses were burnt down, so we don't have many pictures. So the few that she did have, she put them together in an album, and she showed us who they were, and she pointed to them and said, "This is your mother, and this is your father." And my sister and I looked at each other like, "No, what are you talking about? You're my mother." And we're like, "He's our father. Who are these people?" And as hard as it was for her to continue and to try to tell the story, it was necessary for her to begin telling us early enough so that we get the time to digest the information and to grow with it and to ask the questions and to be aware of it, rather than finding out later by somebody else, or be finding out much later when we're older and feel like we had either been lied to or had not been told the full truth. And so her idea was that the sooner where she's able to communicate some of this information to us, the better it would be for us to absorb the information, ask the questions, and take the time to allow the healing process to begin.
Mm-hmm. And in your TED talk, you also talk about shame. You talk about shame which you felt when, for example, your teachers or your classmates at school asked you why you and your sister have different names.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, it was. And that's part of the journey as well, which I discussed in the TED talk. It's basically And I think that's very similar for many people who have been adopted around the world, is that there is that feeling of wanting to belong, of wanting to belong to a group, or belong to a family, or belong to be part of something, right? And so as soon as I found that at my early age, at 7 years old, first my interpretation was, wow, my real parents are actually not alive, and these are my adopted parents. But wow, then does everybody know? Does this invisible, can they tell? And so there's all these ideas of shame, of not being willing to see things straightforward, for not to being willing to accept the fact that I was adopted, and accept the fact that both my parents had been killed. And so that, not only my unwillingness to accept it, but also it was obviously visible because my last name was not the same as my adopted parents. So what made it persistent is the questioning that I would get in school, where people would look at my adoptive brother, whose last name is Rusesabagina, and would look at my sister and I, and ask, or be bewildered, or be confused as to what causes it for us to have different last names. And so then we'd have to explain why it was the case, or sometimes we would just brush over the conversation and say that in Rwanda we have, which is kind of true actually, that in Rwanda we have different families can have different last names based on what the mother chooses, or the mother and the father chooses their children's names to be. So it is partially true, but at the same time there was also a way to avoid going into the complications in the history of our family, which I was not ready to discuss at the time.
And in your TED Talk, you are talking about the power of forgiveness. So how did you decide to do it, and how did it go for you?
So the forgiveness itself, I believe, and again, I discussed the journey itself in the TED Talk, but I think is what it is, the entire journey, right? From the moment I found out, the moment I was 7 years old, and that I found out what my true identity was, and who my real parents were. But also the whole process of, like, the shame process, the process where I was asking all the questions to my parents, the moment where the Hotel Rwanda was released, and then all of a sudden, not only it was no longer just a question of who knew or what the conversation is, but the whole world knew, and would ask us questions about the movie and about our father, and then about our story. And so I was had to learn how to discuss it, I had to learn the history of my country to be able to be comfortable with my own history. And so the whole journey of forgiveness, I would say, is I was able to get there based on asking all these questions, on removing layers of what I felt was heavy for me, what I felt was shameful, what I felt was hurtful. And I hated the people, when I discussed in my TED Talk as well, that as soon as I had found out what happened to my biological parents, I had so much hate in my heart for those people who I didn't even know who they were. And so the fact is, I was putting much more pressure on, much more weight on myself, and much more pain for me than those people that I don't know who they are, what they look like. So the hate that I was harnessing inside was actually what was hurting. And so by allowing myself to have the conversation with my family, by getting my brother and my sister around the table and asking them about how they felt about the whole situation, how they understood, interpreted our mom's story when she first told us. And so the fact is, throughout this whole time, over the past 20 years, all of us were going through our own journeys, but we were not discussing it face to face as much, because we were internalizing it. We're going through our own shame, our own healing, our own anger processes. And so more recently, over the past 5 years or so, we started having conversation about it, and asking questions, and telling each other how we felt about it. And so allowing ourselves to discuss the atrocities that had happened back then, and how it had affected us over the years, is also part of the forgiveness process, was part of the journey, where I got to a point where I told myself that it was for me, that I needed to forgive those people, and that it was going to help me moving forward. And then as soon as I shared that with my brothers and sisters, seeing how their reactions were and how they tried to also apply it for themselves. And it truly felt like a relief. And I hope that you felt it the same, that they felt the same relief. But at the end of the day, it allows you to move easier through life. And it's a lot of layers and weight that is lifted by allowing ourselves to forgive.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Sometimes actually I have some clients who tell me that they can't forgive some very, very simple hurts, for example, someone's rude words. And I mean, here, what you had to forgive the murder of your parents. Also, you had to forgive the fact that you were taken out of the country. And actually, when our parents are taken from us, it is a kind of our trust into the world might be also taken from us, especially if it happens when someone is very, very small. So, what do you think about the trust in the world when you forgave those people who had killed your parents, when you forgave the whole situation? So, had you gained more trust in the world?
I think, yes. I personally, I don't think that's a hard question. I do believe I do trust the world. I think we have a duty, responsibility to remain positive and to see the strength that our great actions, or at least positive action, can bring. But for example, if you talk about the justice process in Rwanda in terms of trust and how to reestablish trust in the world and the communities that we grew up in Rwanda after the war, there was the whole country was in disorder, right? The whole country had to be reconstructed, not only from cleaning up the streets from all of the massacres that had happened, rebuilding the homes that were burnt, but also reestablishing justice among the people who had done wrong to each other. And so after the war, most people who had gone out of the country or who had fled their homes had to come back, made their ways back to their homes or their neighborhoods, to find it a mess and to have to try to reconstruct it. And in many cases, some people were living next to, like we said, next to the neighbors, next to the people who had committed crimes against them. So one way that Rwanda found to try to establish justice in Rwanda and to try to allow those communities to rebuild themselves and to recreate themselves and allow people to move back into their homes and start school again, or for people to start working again, they had to revive an old justice system that was started in Rwanda like centuries ago. And that system is called gacaca, or justice under the grass, justice on the grass. And it's an old way that the people back in the earlier, maybe 1800s in Rwanda, where the elderly men of the village would bring all the people together. And if there was a dispute, there would be one person accusing the other of, let's say, having stolen a goat, and the other person said, would have to then come and answer to that. And then they get to argue. And then at the end of the day, the elderly men in the village would say, we'll be the mediator and find and bring justice and try to find a solution for both people, right? And so that system used to work on more for smaller crimes and smaller things back in many years ago. And so after the war in 1994, the Rwandan government decided to revive the system and create little courts all across the countries where people had gone back to their homes and their villages. And so that allowed people in communities who they knew had murder, genocide perpetrators and victims in the same village, to bring the accusations together, bring the accusation in front of everyone, in front of the village, in front of the elderly, or the justices chosen by the village and by the communities, to try to mediate the conversations and bring all the information on the table, bring all accusations forward, and allow people to either forgive and move forward and be able to reconstruct their communities. So that whole justice system and that whole old gacaca justice system was revived in order to repair the destructions that the genocide had brought on in multiple communities across the country of Rwanda.
And for example, was it possible for all people? I mean, I just can't imagine someone who loses his family, and he knows that, for example, his neighbor has killed his family. So was it possible? Was it easy to forgive?
I'm sure it wasn't easy for sure, but possible. I think it depends on the other person, right? Like I said, the journey of forgiveness is very personal, and it's really based on, but at least while it's personal, and I cannot speak for other people whether they can forgive those that have hurt them. But what I think, and this is also in response to your question about trust, is that the fact that they were able to put their complaints and their accusation on the table and have be listened to, and have the accused listen to them and look at them in the eyes, I think is already reestablishing or giving back some power to the person that had lost so much. And so maybe like forgiving for them might not be possible right now, but it's already a step closer to that. By giving them that platform, you're already bringing them closer to the ability of forgiving. And so to answer again your question on trust, I think just the fact that that system exists and that they were able to put that in place and that it has helped so many people, I think does mean that I have some trust and at least some positive outlook on how in the world and how and how to reconstruct a society after, how possible it is to reconstruct a society after a war.
Actually, after I had listened to your TED Talk, I have listened to a number of other TED Talks on forgiveness, and I have been really shocked how many there are on this talk. It's a very powerful talk and a very powerful question. I have a question which is maybe a little bit unrelated to the question of forgiveness. Nowadays, I'm interested in the psychology of happiness, and there are a number of American psychologists who deal with this. For example, in California, there is a psychologist, Sonia Lubomirsky. There is Martin Seligman, also in Pennsylvania, and many other psychologists who deal with this. I see you are you smile a lot. Would you share your secrets of happiness? I'm asking this question because actually last week I delivered a workshop on the psychology of happiness and joy, and on the habits of happy people. This workshop was in Budapest in English language, and next week I will have a workshop on the psychology of happiness in Hungarian language. It will also be in Budapest. And I collect various habits of people who are happy. So if you could give me about your habits. So how you being happy, joyful.
Yeah, I love that question because I think there is a lot in the way the attitudes or the way you view things can really change your experience, right? Or can really improve the what you're experiencing, what you're going through. And it's part of actually an advice that I try to give all my friends and all the people that are around me, is that it's important to look at things positively, right? That whenever there's a situation that comes up, there's always a positive. However negative the whole situation is, there's always something that you can take out of it to bring you to the next step, and or whether it's a constructive way or in a way to move forward or at least advance. Being positivity at least will always make you look at things in the better way and allow you to at least to change your attitude towards it. And I think I don't think it's a secret, but I think that's my way of trying to remain happy and surround myself with people who do have that level of energy and that level of happiness as well.
Great, thank you. My daughter about 7 years ago used to tell me and her dad, so she told us, "Mom, you are such an optimist. Dad, you are such a pessimist." She said, "And I am a realist." And I told her, "You know, that's really reality of a happy person, the reality of an optimist and the reality of a pessimist, these are very different realities. So it's the same if you have a glass which is half full or half empty, it depends on your attitude, how you look at it. Very soon, actually, in a few days' time, in US they will celebrate Thanksgiving Day. And right now you are living in the US. Am I right?
That's correct.
So you are living in US. So like US is your third country. Can we say? I'm sure that maybe could you tell me how you're planning to celebrate it? This is my one question. And another question is, who are you grateful for in your life? So two questions. So how are you going to celebrate this Thanksgiving Day, and who are you grateful for?
Yeah, so I will be celebrating with some friends. We are calling it Friendsgiving. So we're gonna be just making turkey and having some food and just having wine and drink and enjoying the evening all together. But in terms of thankfulness, I am very thankful for many things. But most importantly, I will eternally be grateful for my family and my parents, who are constantly a system of encouragement and support for me, and who don't generally doubt my decisions and rather push me forward in almost everything that I do. But also everyone from, like you said, this year I did the TED Talk, and the TED team itself had such a great group of people, who included two women who were my coaches that helped me prepare the speech, and they spent hours and hours on Skype with me, and not only dissecting through my story and trying to understand, to help me put my words together. And I'm very grateful for their willingness to go there with me in the journey and share their lives, their stories as well. But mostly being willing to hear me out and learn with me and put the speech together with me. So, yes.
Yes, I would like to wish you to have the most fantastic Thanksgiving Day. Years ago, actually, I used to spend quite a lot of time in the US. I spent 1 year in California, University of California at Berkeley. I got a Fulbright scholarship, and I also happened to be many other times in US. So many times Thanksgiving days when people who were not really my friends, but they invited me. I think it's very important. Important custom in the life of US. And my last question now. Not everyone has such a story as you have. So losing your parents at the age of one. Afterwards moving to one country, going to school there, afterwards getting to US. So like you should consider yourself the citizen of this planet. And
global
or the globe or the universe.
Global citizen. Yes.
Global citizen. Yes. So, do you feel more responsibility for the present of our planet and for the future of our planet? Do you have to do something so that, for example, this genocide, that this unnecessary murders do not happen again? So, what do you do?
Absolutely. I think we all have, I think, that responsibility to remain engaged and to not only continue to inform ourselves on the situation surrounding us, but also be engaged, seek to learn and seek to make a difference, or at least to have actions that will make a difference, whether it's being politically engaged or being or taking actions in relation to climate change or anything really that is close to your heart, but most importantly, just remaining engaged and wanting and doing things that are actively working towards fixing or finding doing work that is actively working towards a solution for those problems, but most importantly engagement, and also finally remembering that you're important and that your story matters and that your journey allows you to find that what it is that you want to be engaged in. But yes, I think mostly cultivating oneself.
Carine, thank you so much for this interview. I have been extremely honored, and I have been very happy that that you have given me time and you have responded to these questions, which I'm sure are actually the questions are not only these questions are for me, but I'm sure that many other people also have these questions, and especially the question like, is it possible to forgive? Is it possible to live a happy life? Is it possible to live a happy and joyful life even after such tragedy has happened? And your answer is, as I can figure out, your answer is yes, it is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you, Anna. Bye.